Welcome to Perspective Shift Spotlight. That's
Spotlight.
almost a tongue twister.
Spotlight.
Spotlight.
I love it. So Spotlight is something Frank and I started doing where we take emails or, direct messages, whatever type of, way we receive communication from the listeners who share their metaphysical experiences, their synchronistic experiences with us here at Perspective Shift. And
Not there, but here.
and then we, it gives us a chance to talk about it as a community.
Yeah.
So this one right here was sent to us by Susan, and I believe it's Susan German or Susan Germain.
Yeah.
But we'll jump into it right here. So this first email she sent us, it's titled Prayer Chaplain, and I'll go ahead and just kind of start reading this. So it goes, Frank and Mike. So a few years ago, I was asked to become a prayer chaplain at our Unity Church. Prayer chaplains are important in our church, and the role of the Unity Prayer Chaplain is to hold spiritual space, listen from the heart, pray with others, and hold in confidence what is shared. Well, the first time I was asked to do this, I said, no way. I had never prayed out loud with anyone except my children, just saying nightly prayers, and my family, saying grace at dinner, etc. I was raised Catholic. My dear minister friend, who is quite persistent, waited a year and then asked me again. And at this time, I decided to consider it more seriously, and I prayed about it. To hear some guidance from my higher power, guides, God, etc. After a week or so, one night after having coffee with a friend whom I was telling about my dilemma, I got in my car to go home, and I got onto a major highway that goes through the middle of Orlando. While driving home, I looked up and saw a giant electric billboard that said in huge letters, "Be a chaplain." I was stunned.
And she wasn't talking about Charlie.
Needless to say, I followed my literal sign and became, and still am to this day, a Unity Prayer Chaplain. By the way, I had never seen this sign before, and I had only seen it once again in a different location along the highway with my husband. We could never find out what it was advertising. Okay,
Yeah.
So this is a great example of synchronistic experience.
Yeah, and the way synchronistic experiences pop up and the way we understand it in this physical world is the closer we get to understanding these premises of letting go of having to plan things out and know the answer, that's when synchronicity comes up. Because synchronicity happens all the time. We just don't witness it. So there's always a ship coming in. But when we get closer to this higher understanding of letting go and allowing, that's when it really comes big, like a billboard such as
The chaplain.
Susan experienced on the freeway. Like, come on. Like,
What are the chances of that?
Yeah, what are the chances? So that's kind of like how it's, again, this is only the way I can explain it is you're getting higher and trusting in the system, in the universal system, at a greater level, and this way synchronicity like this becomes very obvious because everyone has access to it. It's just that we along the way we become better at trusting it, or greater at trusting, I should say, and we do so. These synchronicities come in a billboard form. So now there was no doubt, and she became a chaplain.
Well, and I love this because, guys, you'll see this all the time when you look for it. Like Frank was saying, this is around us all the time. All these synchronistic moments, etc. We just, blow right past them. Think nothing of it, etc. But when we're really present and in the moment, there'll be certain songs we turn on. And we're like, oh my God, and these songs will flood all these, different memories or feelings or emotions. And you'll know exactly in that moment you were supposed to hear that song. I've had that happen to me so many times. Or there's a number of different things, you might see a movie clip, that reminds you of something or whatever it may be. There's these different moments where you're like, this was a sign.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to Susan here.
Well, the correlation with Susan, where it came about, is when she went to have a cup of coffee with a friend and pray over it.
Yeah.
So she set forth to pray to get the answer. Now, like before, she was just being asked, and she was thinking about it. I'm like, oh, it's probably, I don't know what her thoughts were, but probably like, I've never done this before, or do I really want to get involved in this? But then it's like, okay, it's presented again. So then when she went to the form of prayer to give me an answer, whether I should do it or not, and either way would have been fine. But in this case, she got the billboard. So you have to put forth energy knowing it's going to work, because if you don't know you can make it somewhere, you simply don't go there, so you'll never get this synchronistic sign because you didn't move towards it. So she was moving towards it in her prayer state, and then in the physical world, it presented itself. So yeah, she at some level wanted to be it, but then didn't know.
And
the billboard,
the open to it,
yeah,
being open
yeah.
to
Obviously, she was open to it. She wouldn't have prayed for it.
Exactly.
She would have prayed for the guy to go away.
and leaving that open space allows, these synchronistic moments.
So yeah, remember, like if you want something, pray for it. And the prayer is placing yourself in the situation, the circumstance already being there, and then allow it. Don't try to figure it out. Allow it to come. And just like Susan, she saw the billboard.
And one of my favorite, sayings from the Bible is, what is it? I believe it's like, believe you have received it and it shall be yours.
Yeah.
That's the true form of prayer.
And those type of sayings are throughout the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's just so important.
Forms, yeah.
That it's not, hope that something, is there, or desire something, or constantly think about something until it's there. It's no, you believe it to be done and you move forward. And so that's real powerful. Susan had one other story that we're going to also share because this one's very cool. Yeah. We're going to summarize this one just because this one's a little bit lengthier. But this is about her mother passing. And so she starts and she explains, in the fall of 2012, I started to get this feeling that my mom, Teresa, was getting close to leaving us. She was 83 at the time. And then she goes in to kind of explain that she has her mom's live-in partner, Sam, was now permanently in a wheelchair, and they had nurses and aides coming in every day. So she's kind of painting the scene, of the experience. And so then she starts talking about, I told my brother, Tony, who's an actor and lives in NYC, that he might want to come home for Christmas because I felt this was going to be the last Christmas with her. Then it goes on to say that while this was going on, Sam's son, Jose, had been going through pancreatic cancer and was quite ill. On January 9th, I drive my mom to the doctor's appointment. While driving home, she says to me, can Nicole, my eldest daughter, and Tony, her husband, live in my house if I die? I replied, of course, but you are not going to die. So then she says, Presley, Nicole's first child, arrived somewhat unexpected by C-section. I managed to get my mom to the Florida hospital to meet the great-granddaughter, get 2 photos. And then as we come down to here, I get the call that that my mother is found in bed. My husband and I go right over to the house. I go in and see my mom, and she looks just like she's made her transition in her sleep. Very comfortable. Of course, Sam is freaked out and in denial. And then we get a call that Jose has passed away too. The FD and PD arrive as they come, and the PD stay until the funeral home is called. I call my Uncle Joe, who's like my second dad, and tell him what has happened. He lives in Jupiter, Florida. He tells me that he can be at the house soon, as he happened to be in a business meeting at the time. Suddenly, I really want to pray over my mom, but my Uncle Joe there. So now there is this feeling of needing him to arrive before the funeral home comes to take my mom. Finally, the doorbell rings, and I'm dreading it's the funeral home, but it's Joe. He comes in, we get to pray and hold her together. And then just exactly when we are done, the doorbell rings and the funeral home arrives. It was such a relief that they didn't come earlier. That in itself is very synchronistic that Joe got to, coming from Florida, was able to make it before the funeral home arrived. Just strictly speaking, time-wise, for him to travel from Jupiter to the mom in Lake Mary was quite a challenge to get there before the funeral home arrived. So I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah. But she says, the next morning, I get a call from Joe's Samson's wife. She tells me that something unusual happened while Jose was in the hospital dying. As he lay in his bed with his family around him, he suddenly sits up and turns toward the door and says, Teresa, what are you doing here? Then he passed away. No one at the time could figure out what he was talking about because no one knew that my mom, Teresa, had died at the same time. So my mom passed away and then appeared to help Jose make his transition.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
And this even goes beyond synchronicity. Synchronicity is because it is a synchronistic story, but it goes beyond some other plane of knowing, beyond this plane in which we are experiencing right now.
How we are all connected.
Yeah. So, because it was even like, obviously Jose had seen this, Teresa, being Susan's mom, transition. So he was able to communicate beyond this plane, even though he still was physically in this plane.
Correct.
So there's a lot we don't know. but yet we're aware of it. And little stories like this help people to realize that, hey, one of the biggest fears is not just death, it's non-existence. And the truth is, it's impossible to not exist. We will transition, we will die, but into something else. So a story like this, especially for Susan and her family members, that definitely helps ease what is going to be the mourning period of pain coming into stuff like this, and other people listening in that's going through this. Yeah, there is something else that happens that's beautiful on the other side. Until we go there to fully experience, we won't know. But just having this in the back of your head helps you move on and hold a steady, steady plane in your head. Absolutely. On this physical plane.
And I think it shows you too just how connected we all really are. Again, we were taught, and we grow up and we learn that we're like these separate beings. We're different from everybody. We're separate from everyone in their experiences. But it couldn't be further from the truth. We are all connected. And you can see that here when Jose calls out to Teresa. He didn't know that Teresa, had passed. Nobody in that room knew that Teresa, Susan's mom, had passed. But Jose, on his deathbed right there, Teresa, what are you doing here? Watching her come to, Jose during that moment and helping him transition is beautiful.
Yeah.
And why would he just randomly say Teresa, in a room with, his children, et cetera? Nobody knows who Teresa is. Yeah. It wasn't random. These aren't just coincidences, et cetera. He physically, I shouldn't say physically, he was connected to Teresa in that moment and was experiencing on a non-physical level from his physical being, Teresa, which is so cool. Like, you can't make this stuff up.
No. And what else is dynamic about this story? Because here in the physical plane, we think this is all there is. This is where all suffering begins. So when you hear stories like this, whether you believe it or not, it's not like Susan made this up. She's just narrating what she witnessed. Mm-hmm. It actually lets you know that this physical plane is only one aspect of life, one aspect of the perspective in which we're living. And when you know there's other aspects, it doesn't make this one so harsh. And suffering actually will be eliminated through these understandings because, it's going to be challenges and everything else. But, man, where do we go after this?
There's this whole other world outside.
Whole other world. We're in a closet in a mansion right now. So, God's made of many mansions. We're literally in a closet in this physical world. But something wrong with it. It's a big closet, thank God.
It is a big closet. But I mean, like, I love where you're going with that because that's the truth. Like, we live right now in this world, in this, Western culture or whatever, where we're taught. And this is where a lot of like depression and, anxiety and everything comes from, is that, we're separate, we're physical, and that if we can't touch it, and we can't measure it, then it's not real. Well, we can't measure this experience of him, seeing Teresa. We can't prove this, but why on his deathbed was he calling out to Teresa when no Teresa was in the room? Why was he asking, what are you doing here? He did not know that Teresa had just passed away, minutes earlier from wherever she was in Florida, in two separate locations. And so I just think it's very, very telling about, what's this whole other world that's out there that we don't talk about in Western culture. And that if it's something that can't be measured, then it's not true. We're taught to separate that. And in order to become whole and to find, this state of happiness and, experience life to the fullest, you have to see that there's this whole other realm out there besides this physical world that we were taught to live in. And it's finding a balance between these two is how you find, that feeling of wholeness.
Yeah, but that realm that's out there, if it wasn't for that realm, this physical world would not exist. Just like the movie screen, or I say the projector, if the projector did not exist, there would be no movie. Yeah. So realize that we are that projector, so to speak. We are that experience. We just have an experience in the physical world. And Mike calls himself Mike. I call myself Frank, and Karen calls me Frankie. It's something along those lines. But yeah, so it's the purpose and understanding. So we're getting these little hints is really what it is. It's kind of like we're in this we're in a game of scavenger hunt. We get these hints all along, and eventually we get to a point where you start to conclude, okay, there's something else bigger and out there. We all know this. And when you realize, hey, this earth is like a vacation, and part of the vacation is you got to work 40 hours or plus a week, go to school and all this
Messed
shit.
up vacation.
But you're like, hey, it's a play, so you'll enjoy it more. But if you thought this is all there is, you're going to suffer tremendously, like I did at a certain period in my life. Because when I was younger, I didn't suffer. But when I got them, like, I have to do this for how long? Till you retire. I'm like, damn.
Mm-hmm.
And then I woke up from that and realized, and the reason I said damn is because I realized empirically, this can't be it. This cannot be it. Like, God did not put me here to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
My parents did.
I love it.
Yeah.
One thing that Frank mentioned too was just how when we have experiences like this, it makes it easier, on us individually, to accept, things like death, and being apart. And I thought that was funny because we replied to Susan about this, and she wrote back, and one of the things she said was exactly that. What did she say? This is a reply email to us, but she was saying, I did want to add one thing. After all this happened when my mom passed away, I never really felt too much grief. Of course, I missed her physically, but I knew without a doubt that she left this life exactly when she wanted to, and she knew exactly where she was going. And that is so profound, Susan, and such the truth. See, we were just talking about this in our last episode of Perspective Shift too. Society conditions us to think that we need to be like extremely, upset and in tears and falling apart and, and can't work, can't get out of bed because that's proving Susan's love for her mother. No, that's total BS. Susan absolutely loves, adores her mom, etc. And she says that here. She says, I never really had to feel too much grief because she knew.
Yeah, grief and suffering are not to be synonymous. They're not the same. So when you're suffering, grieving, what you would think is grieving, but grieving is a process of coming to a different understanding. So, feeling the somber aspect of life, crying. Yes, these are all natural byproducts. 'Cause crying is actually a physical form of letting go. And when a loved one of ours dies, we have to let go. We have no choice. But if you don't know of anything on the other side, you suffer tremendously to where you don't let go. That's why it gets painful. That's why you get angry. So Susan was at a place when her mother passed by where she did grieve, but she didn't suffer tremendously like a lot of people do, misunderstanding or not quite understanding it. But she got a gift at the end, hearing the story about Jose screaming out to her mom, and obviously she was already along this path way before this happened. So.
And Susan, your mom's with you in this moment right now, just like she's with us, and experiencing this whole big play that we call life.
That's it. She just exits stage left.
Mm-hmm.
Now she's in the audience.
Well,
right.
Thank you so much for writing in, Susan. This was absolutely awesome, and we were so honored to feature your story here on Perspective Shift Spotlight. I was going to say, naturally,
we should have thought about that title,
to
Perspective Shift Spotlight.
Yeah,
it's like Sally sells cheese at the seashore. sells shells at the seashore.
Well,
I wasn't good at that as a child, so not even as an adult.
Well, if you guys like what you heard today, please reach out with and share your Spotlight experience, because Frank and I love communicating back with you guys. You can reach us at perspectiveshift2020@gmail.com or any of our social media handles. You can send us in a direct message, Facebook message, whatever's easiest for you guys.
All right. Peace out.
Thanks, guys. Bye.